But we begin in Eastern Europe, where U.S. officials say Russia has moved some weapons into possible attack positions. Meanwhile, Moscow says some of its troops are pulling back from the region, but large-scale drills are still ongoing. Charlie Daggett joins us now with the details on that. Charlie, good morning. Good to see you. So explain to us. We understand that the Russian government and the Russian Foreign Ministry has says that they are sort of de-escalating things. But what are you seeing on the ground?
Well, Vlad, that is the question. What does de-escalation mean? We'll get into that in just a second, but I'll tell you where we are now. This is Lviv, where the U.S. Embassy has moved to because of that huge Russian troop buildup along the border. They're here temporarily for security reasons, but as you said, conditions here are confusing. There has been a dramatic and worrying shift in Russia's readiness to attack in the past 48 hours. In an overt show of force, troops have stepped up military drills in the region. A U.S. official tells CBS News that Russia has now moved rocket launchers and long-range artillery into firing positions. New satellite images show ground troops moving from staging areas toward combat positions and newly deployed bombers. And yet the Russian Ministry of Defense released this footage, claiming to show the pullback of some tanks, saying troops are being withdrawn after the conclusion of some military exercises. Amid the uncertainty, American IT executive Heath Morrison decided to move his family here from Kyiv. Are you worried?
I don't feel a huge amount of anxiety right now or worry. I worry a lot for Ukraine. I don't worry for my personal safety.
And you have a son.
Yeah, son. He's 6 years old. I mean, definitely that's a factor. I certainly worry about his exposure to chaos or anything like that.
If there is a mass exodus of people, including Americans, it's likely they'll head here to Lviv, a vibrant city in the west. It's thought, or at least hoped, to be safer than other parts of Ukraine, and it's about an hour's drive to the Polish border. We visited that border to find it all quiet on the Western Front. Nothing unusual about the line of tractor trailers and scattering of cars crossing the border. Now, there's definitely been a change in tone here. The Russians are talking more about diplomacy. They're making a big deal of pulling back a few tanks and troops, but we're definitely going to have to see what today will bring. Lana and Vlad?
Charlie, you say that they pulled back a few of those tanks. Do we have a sense of how many troops Russia has pulled back and how significant that is?
Lana, that's key. It's extremely significant. So we're hearing about 10,000 troops, and where troops that are pulling out of Crimea, troops that are pulling around that region, that contested region along the Ukrainian border in Russia. The Russians will always argue that we can move troops along our own soil as we please. There's also going to be a drawdown, we're told, in the next 4 or 5 days of a much more contentious area in Belarus. That's where exercises are taking place, not technically Russian territory, but with Belarusian troops there. What's important here is to remember there are 130,000, excuse the traffic, 130,000 Russian forces who have been perched right on the edge of Ukraine as far as they can in every place that they can reach. They've got fighter jets, they've got tanks, they've got artillery, and they have moved artillery into fighting positions. So yes, 10,000 troops. We've seen the video. They've made sure, the Russian Defense Ministry has made sure that we've seen the video to say, look, we are pulling back. But as far as America, the U.S. officials we spoke to are concerned, they're watching it. It does not prove to be an escalation. NATO today came out and said this is not a de-escalation. So it's something, but it's not everything.
And Charlie, it's right that you point out the traffic that is happening behind you there, because I've seen surreal images and reporting from you and the rest of our CBS News colleagues, Holly Williams and MTS Tayeb, showing people just going about their daily lives.
More lives than New York City in some cases.
Exactly. You see that traffic. You see kids in playgrounds. So is there a sense that the Ukrainian people believe that diplomacy still has a shot?
Yes, Vlad, it's one of those situations, I've covered enough conflict zones. It's like you want to walk down the street and say, don't you people read the newspapers? Aren't you watching television? You're about to be at war. The Ukrainians have been hoping and desperate that this can find a diplomatic solution. Ukrainian leaders have been hopeful for a diplomatic solution. The president, Vladimir Zelensky, yesterday cracking a joke, which really didn't go down well internationally, but he was kind of saying tomorrow is going to be a day of unity and pride for Ukraine, because it was predicted by the United States and others that is when the Russians would invade. And he was kind of cracking a joke that, well, maybe that's not the case. In terms of the atmosphere here, absolutely. Lviv especially, we're so far west. It took us about 7-8 hours to drive from Kyiv to get here. We're about an hour and 10-20 minutes from the Polish border. I asked around here, we've been asking around whether there's been like a ton more people coming here from Kiev or other areas of Ukraine. That's really not the situation. We went to the border late last night. We spoke to border patrol officers there. We thought, is there going to be a flood of people trying to get out? That's not the case either. So, the general public here are really hopeful that they're used to living with this Russian threat. They've been dealing with it since 2014. The Russians have already invaded, or Russian separatists have already invaded parts of Ukraine. They're hoping, in fact, they're desperate to believe that there will be a diplomatic solution to this. At the same time, they're not naive. They see the newspaper, they see the reports, they see our reports, and they can see how many Russian troops are perched right on the edge of their territory, but they're used to it. They just think this is a bit of political positioning from President Putin. Ukrainians have lived with this for some time, and they're hoping, as it's the human condition to hope, that they're going to find a diplomatic solution rather than a military solution to this. It's a little bit different in Kiev, because if there is to be, a full-scale invasion, or even a small-scale, in a manner of speaking, incursion, well, that's obviously going to affect the local population. But certainly here, it's nothing like that at all. I mean, yesterday was Valentine's Day. Saw a lot of people buying flowers and balloons, and just, it's just a normal day.
Human condition to hope. All right, Charlie, thank you. Let's bring in Weijia Jiang now for more on how Washington is handling this potential crisis in Eastern Europe. Weijia, good to see you. So President Biden spoke with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson yesterday. What did they discuss?
Well, they talked about that window for a diplomatic path that Charlie just talked about as well, and they are hoping to hash one out, but they're also very realistic about Russian aggression, about the developments, and about what that could mean. These two leaders also talked about beefing up security along NATO's eastern flank and reiterated their commitment to make sure that Russia faces severe consequences if it were to invade Ukraine. Of course, this is just one of several calls that President Biden has had in recent days with leaders in the region. He actually hosted the German chancellor here at the White House last week. He was on the phone with Ukraine's president and the Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, who unfortunately, after that phone call over the weekend, they did not reach any sort of diplomatic breakthrough. And so he continues to talk with other foreign leaders, really bracing for the worst case scenario so that they have a plan in action, and they have to make sure they're all on the same page.
Yeah, so we spoke yesterday about the invitation extended by President Zelensky to President Biden. But now we're learning that Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, as you just said, is traveling to Eastern Europe today. Where will he be, and what are the expectations for this trip?
Right. Well, first, Vlad, to your point, the White House has not officially said how President Biden has responded to the Ukrainian president, although I can tell you behind the scenes, without saying it, the answer is basically that's not going to happen. However, you're right. Today, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is heading to Belgium and Poland and Lithuania to talk to all the leaders in those countries about the buildup there. He's also going to be talking to NATO leaders in Brussels, really doing the same thing that the president's been doing on the phone, which is to make sure that there is a plan of action to try to also talk about any potential for diplomacy, even though the Pentagon has said in recent days that it does not look like there's any intention for Russia to de-escalate. However, based on Charlie's reporting, that could be changing. Of course, things are minute by minute, second by second, and that is why they are so closely monitoring all the developments in Russia on that border.
All right, the world is holding their collective breath. Weijia Jiang at the White House for us. Thank you, Weijia.
Sure.